Aunt Besta's story. She was christened Mary Elizabeth, but when my sister Eugenia was a little girl, she couldn't say Elizabeth, but said, "I like her Bestas." She became Aunt Bestas to our family. Most people called her Eliza. She was a maiden lady, she explained to me once when I asked, "Aunt Bestas, are you an old maid?" The only girl among three brothers and more sheltered than most anyone. Education for girls was not considered necessary in those days. In some way or other, our folks got a pedal organ and Eliza took music lessons. She went to Olean once a month and went down on the morning train and back on the evening train. Sometimes she would stay overnight with Mrs. Page and have 2 lessons while in town. Professor Crumpf gave lessons in one of the churches in Olean. He also taught music at St. Bonaventure's College. He was the grandfather of Harry Crumpf that married Anita McAuliffe, our cousin. Aunt Bestas got so she played for the church services in Sartwell and played for the family and neighbors. It was custom to stand around the organ or piano and sing. John could play the fiddle a little by ear, and Dad told me John had a real good voice. Mrs. Colley and the other neighbors have told me of the nice musical evenings they used to enjoy at the McCarey farm. When Eliza was 25, she got paralysis, infantile, polio or whatever. She was paralyzed. It came on in stages, but she did become totally helpless. Dad was in medical school at the time. He came home and had her taken to Buffalo. At the hospital there, they felt that she could be better taken care of at home. They really knew very little about it at the time. There was a lady in the neighborhood who was sort of a nurse, and with her help and Anna Bly, who the McCareys had taken in when her mother died when she was just a baby. She was a good-sized girl now. With grandmother, they cared for Eliza, bathed and looked after her like an infant. I think she said that she was immobile for 2 years. She said, "They kept me in a cot and batten-like thing." She was a determined person, so while lying there, she decided she must walk, in spite of the doctor's advice. She said, "While I still have my senses, I am going to walk." With the help of Anna and the boys, she got to sitting up and in a chair, and after a while on her feet. Her fingers and toes remained in a shut-tight position, except for the thumb and first finger. They were less deformed than the others. Walking was always very difficult for her. I was always amazed at what she could do with those poor cramped hands. Of course the organ playing was out, but I have seen her one finger out a melody. She loved music and even suffered my fiddle squawking. She could not do needlework or sewing like my mother did. Most of the other housework she could do, wash dishes, peel potatoes, shell peas, and a lot of the cooking. She had a way of getting a hot pad on her elbow to steady heavy kettles. She would hold the broom against her side with her elbow and do a good job of sweeping. I was surprised every day the way she would get a way of doing things. I mentioned she was a determined person, yes indeed. If she had the therapy that they have now, she would have been practically normal. She had a full life even with her handicap. She would not complain. She could read and she loved to. She retained almost everything she ever read. She was intensely interested in everything that happened with us kids. She would take each of us aside and quiz us about everything that happened since the last time she saw us. Mother used to laugh about my coming to her, saying, "Gee, Aunt Bestas wants to hear your confession." One time when Jean was home from college and was talking with Aunt Bestas, she came out to Mother in the kitchen and said, "Aunt Bestas could teach English literature. She understands Dickens and his characters like they were her neighbors." Mother and Dad saw that Aunt Bestas was supplied with good reading material. Christmas and birthdays they sent subscriptions. We saved our magazines and good books to take up to the farm. They got them a Victorola and records, very good ones, which she loved. It was in the front parlor. You had to have on clean clothes to sit in there. The front parlor was for special company. There was a large living room where the family usually sat. Each one had his own chair, all around the big gas stove. They had gas lights with mantles. Uncle Gene used to brag, just as bright as sunlight. As Aunt Bestis was getting about and better, grandmother was failing. Dad tried to make weekly trips from Portville. He was anxious about their old country back house arrangement. Uncle Gene couldn't understand why fuss about it. It's been all right for all these years. If you don't want to go out in the cold, there's a thunder mug under the bed. What is wrong with that? That is the way things are. Dad tried his best with persuasion, but one weekend he went up there alone. He took Uncle Gene and John aside and gave it to them in this way. I have tried to persuade you to listen to reason about an inside bathroom for my mother and Eliza. Now I have a contractor coming Monday morning. He will find out what is necessary to do to bring in water and make a good inside and warm bathroom for my mother and the girls. I don't give a damn if you want to go up to the old back house and freeze. I'm having this done for my mother. I have ordered it and I'm going to pay the bill. I have just as much right to this property as either of you. I have a legal right to do this at my own expense. I have a personal obligation to see that it is done immediately. I am not going to discuss it with you. I will not listen to you. If I have to use the sheriff, I will. I am demanding that you will not interfere with these men. You will not give them any orders or advice. If they request and you are able to give them some help, that will be fine. Otherwise, keep out of their way. If they don't do a good job, they won't get paid, and they understand this is the condition. This was a terrific flare-up for my dad. Mother said he had been a smoldering fire for a few days, but when he came back from the farm, he was all calmed down. I have seen him irritated, but never have seen him blown up. I guess he really did this time. Mother told me, early next morning, Uncle Gene was at the door. Will Michael see me? I don't want trouble. I don't want a family quarrel. I just can't stand a family quarrel. Mother said Uncle Gene was crying. She was crying. She said, your dad came in, and he was cold. She said, I have never seen him so cool and hard. He calmly said, I have no more to say on the subject. If you are prepared to cooperate, I am pleased. Uncle Gene said, Michael, I will do it in any way you want. I'll share the cost. Dad said he would pay for the work to be done. If you can help out without interference or advice, that will be fine. They shook hands and hugged each other. Dad got down his best bottle of whiskey, and they were brothers again. Uncle Gene never quite totally got over this. He spoke to me about it once. James, don't ever cross your father. He can be a bitter man. I am his older brother, and he defied me to the teeth. It was just awful to see that man turn that bitter. The saddest time in my life, and his too, I am sure. You cannot afford to cross that man. If Uncle Gene was bothered, Aunt Bestis was pleased. We never dreamed of such luxury. Anna, of course, was delighted, and grandmother would tell me to get to be just like my daddy. She was very happy about the new bathroom. They built on a good-sized room, went up to the upper spring, made a reservoir, brought down a 4-inch line, then bushed it to 1 inch so there was a good pressure at the tap. There was gas from the pipeline that went by and hooked onto our well. The deal on our gas well was no royalty, but the gas company agreed to supply gas to the farm as long as the McCarey brothers owned it. It turned out to be a fine arrangement. Someone came from Ireland once and brought Dad some peat. He took it up to show grandmother. She hardly looked at it, said, I have seen tons of the filthy stuff on the bogs. Thanks be to God we have our own clean gas. Aunt Bestis kept getting around better. Grandmother was forgetful. She would put her glasses on her forehead and couldn't find her specs. She smoked a clay pipe. She would spill the tobacco in the ashes. Aunt Bestis was always going around after her. Mother, you have got to be more careful. They fixed grandmother's chair by the kitchen window and near the stove so it would be nice and warm. The floors were painted wood and safer than if hot ashes were spilled on the carpet. Grandmother sort of held court in her little nook. Visitors pulled up a chair to her to talk. She sometimes went to sleep while they were talking. I am sorry I did not listen to her more about the old days. Jean and she visited a lot. I couldn't sit still for very long. And anyway, grandmother would be telling you something, then drop her head and snooze a minute, then look at you and say, What was it you wanted, child? About building the bathroom. John kept his hands completely off. really completely. He did his farm work and kept absolutely away from the carpenters and plumbers. Uncle Gene held back from offering advice, but he was Johnny on the spot to give assistance when it was requested. They always kept the old back house because John would not use the inside toilet. It was many years later, and after he had returned from a serious operation at the Bradford Hospital, before he could be persuaded. He used to say, "By gol, I sure ain't going to do one of my jobs in the house." It took a long time, but even Uncle John succumbed to the gentle life. Dad did not talk much about the family history. Most of the things I learned were from Aunt Bestas, but Jean would know much more than I. She and Anna and Bestas would have great confabs as they did the dishes and the house chores. I got little fragments of conversation, and some of the things I was most interested in I was too young to know about. I found a lot of things to do about the farm that had nothing to do with farm work. Fishing, swimming, woodchuck hunting, and just wandering in the woods. I was a busy kid while on the farm. I had pals among the neighbor kids. It was fun on the farm. When I went up there as an adult, I paid more attention to what Aunt Bestas told about their life in the early days and as she and Dad grew up. That he would teach school 2 terms so he could save enough to go to college for a year. She had some music students. She played for parties.